Hello there, welcome to another Seeing Clearly with Charlotte Giblin. I bet you didn't think it was that big, did you? I love playing with scale. So this has been inspired by a recent interview I did with Adam Harris from Frank and Fearless. We recorded an interview for his Elevate podcast, and it was one of those fantastic, juicy conversations which just hit the ground running, the kind of exchange I absolutely love. When the podcast is up, I'll put a link in the YouTube description if you're interested in hearing our discussion. Because one of the subjects which came out really early on in the conversation was about fear. Adam was asking me how I got into art. It was just, a general sort of opening question. And me being me, right into the guts of it all, I mentioned that I noticed, learned, observed from a really early age that all people are connected by their fears. And I could see his eyes widen and he said, "Oh my goodness, that is a really interesting point. Can we come back to that?" Because I said, as opposed to the idea that we're all connected by hopes and dreams and joy and things like that, it's not new to understand that there are underlying fears and insecurities which are very relevant across human experience. Of course, very basic fears like lack of shelter and food. I mean, there are drives which we need to satisfy that force us into certain types of behavior and self-serving behavior, self-protective behavior. But what I observed as a child looking around me, and if you've seen my videos before, you do know my story of my mum with mental health issues and anorexia. But I would look around and I felt so clearly an understanding of people making decisions because they were afraid of being alone. And that was the point that I was making with Adam. And it's the umbrella over my whole life's work, and it underpins everything that I do, everything I started doing. This notion that we make decisions, we are driven by a desire, by a fear of being alone, and by a desire to connect. And that covers an enormous number of subjects. And you can't even begin to scratch the surface on such a huge and fascinating topic. But I realized that I hadn't done a video in the Seeing Clearly series, which was specifically about that fear. I've alluded to it many times, and it does underpin a lot of the content of the book. But you know me, it was a case of just strapping on the microphone, pressing record, one take, let's see what comes out, as this is so sort of fresh in my mind. It's been going over and over in my mind with my own experience of feeling alone or not. And as always, when I'm giving these talks, when I'm recording for you, this is partly about my story. Well, of course, for me, it's my story. I'm a storyteller, but I am telling my story as a form of connection because of the need to not feel alone, the need to belong, the need to discover that somebody else feels the same, and understanding how important that is. So my stories are always intended as a mirror for you, or some kind of reflection point where you can react to what I'm saying. Maybe you'll feel that my story resonates with you. Maybe you'll completely disagree, but you might think about somebody else's experience in a different way. So, because it's a massive subject and quite a challenging one to address. And as always, I say you never ever have to question anything that feels good. You only need to question things that cause you any kind of negative reaction, any negative feelings within. Those feelings are there for a reason. That adrenaline, that concern is always alerting you to something that you really ought to address if you want to continue evolving. And for me, the subject of the fear of being alone has driven some of my decisions for sure. And that is the point. When we recognize our fears or our negative patterns of behavior that we've been carrying with us since childhood, a lot of it inherited, some of it learned from our environmental experiences, what do you do with those experiences? What do you do with those situations? What are the choices that you make based on those fears? And this huge umbrella of the fear of being alone, how does that fear, because we all have it, whether it's from a basic security standpoint to a need to be in a relationship, there are many, many, many different facets to this subject. But how does it inform your choices, and which of those choices have created some kind of negative output for you, negative result, and what are you then doing about that? So we feel, I say we, because I know that I'm not the only person who has been driven by a lot of these ideas and notions. We feel compelled to find a place of belonging, don't we? We look for people who understand us. We yearn for connection. And if we can't find it in our home environment, hopefully we can find it at school, amongst our friends, amongst colleagues. And then as we get older, you really look for that kind of connection with a partner. People are driven towards the need, the compulsion to connect. And I'm not just talking about the need to have a family, the desire to have children. I'm talking about the soul's yearning to find somebody to be with. But that doesn't necessarily mean be in a partnership. I'm talking more broadly about finding people that you can share your hopes and dreams with, who understand where you're going as well as where you're coming from. And there's a yawning difference between fearing being alone and feeling lonely or physically being on your own. I've been single for more of my life than I've been in a partnership. So that I was never driven to find a partner. I never felt like I needed that company, but I always had a large group of friends, people I could be myself with, people I could relax with and find connection. All of my work throughout my life has been about finding connection, trying to understand how to do that, trying to find my tribe, trying to feel like I wasn't strange, trying to find the place where I fit in. And yet I've been thinking about this quite a lot over the last couple of days, the whole concept of being alone, or the fear of being alone, left alone. And I actually can't ever remember feeling alone or feeling lonely. I really started to wonder, have I ever felt lonely? And I think for me, and this is partly why this painting is forming the backdrop of this talk, because this represents me. That was actually painted from my face. Always difficult to tell when there's no hair and no glasses. But this is a representation of me in meditation or just thinking. I've always had so many vivid imaginary worlds going on, some with real characters, some with science fiction characters. They have been with me since I was a child. They are some of my earliest memories and have given me an enormous amount of support and escapism and a sense of belonging when things have been more challenging in reality. I've always known I could go for a walk, I could just pop up into one of my alternative realities, sort things out up there. Maybe I need to get rid of some anger, get rid of some frustration. I can imagine myself doing it in one of these alternative realities while I'm walking, getting rid of all that adrenaline. Completely transforms my mood. And it's also meant that I've never felt alone because I feel like I'm surrounded by all of these other people, all of these characters. And to me, they feel just as real as some of my real friends in 3 dimensions. And that is another huge umbrella subject with the search for connection, which brings faith and spirituality into it. Do people yearn for a spiritual or a religious connection? Do they look for that because they feel more of a sense of belonging, because you feel less alone? If there's somebody unseen or a presence unseen who you feel is watching over you and looking after you, a lot of us actually feel very connected energetically to another force. And this was an attempt to illustrate some of the thought processes, some of the energetic whirls that go on in my mind. I mean, we can think about so many different things all at once, it feels like it, and some ideas just zoom across and others really hang around for a while. And this was just trying to capture, a moment of all of those different layers, and also explaining why I've never felt alone or lonely. In fact, I need to find alone time. I'm the kind of person who craves time on my own. And I'm naturally a very sociable, chatty, confident human being, but I need space alone to recharge and to be able to bring all my energy back to myself, because I've always expended so much energy with other people, around other people, for other people. You know all about my roles of responsibility and taking care of others, don't you? But the point there is that for me, being alone is an incredibly positive driving force. It's when we fear being alone that we start making decisions that are detrimental to our well-being, whether it's our mental health or, well, isn't that the most important thing, our physical health? And there are a lot of grey areas here. I know that absolutely. But I also know that many people, like my mum, for instance, she was terrified of my dad dying first because she couldn't look after herself, and she had this abject fear of being left alone. And it drove a lot of her behavioural decisions, almost, making her more clingy, more anxious, which of course can have the opposite effect that we want. It doesn't draw people to us, it makes them step away. But she was terrified of being left alone, even though there would have been a really big support network around her, and people do step in and help. There is a huge community support network as well as a family support network around most people. And mum certainly had that. But people who decide to stay in really unhealthy relationships because they are afraid of what's going to happen when they're on their own. And again, this is a hugely emotive, very difficult, complexity, lots of layers which are complex to this subject, with why people stay in difficult relationships and why they are afraid to be on their own. And so much of it is wrapped up with our identity that we craft from a young age and then into adulthood, and the tribe of people we have around us. Changing that tribe, changing friends, changing our identity can become one of the most difficult, most challenging things we could ever attempt to contemplate. And that's one of the reasons why many people don't make drastic change, even if it's going to be beneficial to themselves in the long run, because of that short-term fear of what's going to happen in the interim. Can I look after myself financially? What about physical and emotional security? And how am I going to make new friends? And there are so many layers of insecurity there. And I say that I've never felt alone or lonely, but have I ever felt insecure? Well, of course. And have I needed to have people around me to feel like I wasn't alone? Absolutely. And do we now find ourselves with social media and the internet inclined to reach out more and more? Of course, because it helps us feel like we are connected. It helps us feel like we're not alone, that we can have a voice, that we can watch the video back and say, look, I exist. My existence is being acknowledged. And that is huge. Sometimes the most important part of someone's day is being noticed and acknowledged. Their existence is, they are being seen. Their existence is being noticed by somebody else enough for it to be commented on, enough for that person to feel like they matter. And all of those very potent social issues around identity, around security and insecurity drive a lot of our decisions. And where we choose to go or don't choose to go, the risks that we choose to take, emigrating, leaving all of that security. I came to New Zealand on a one-way ticket with my partner. We'd been together maybe 9 months at the time that we left. But it was a huge decision to leave all of the people that I knew and loved and to strike out on my own with a relatively new partner, doing something entirely for myself. And it could have fallen flat on its face. And oh boy, were there some difficult times where I really did fall flat on my face. And I've been through a lot of challenging situations where I've had to ask myself, why am I staying in this situation? What am I afraid of if I remove myself from the situation? And each time I asked myself that, I knew that the answer was that I hadn't yet had the courage to really look at my own behaviour, to take responsibility and to learn from the lesson. So rather than running away, rather than making a fear-based decision to leave a situation, I made a decision to stay in difficult situations to try and work out whether it could be possible to improve the situation. And it was. If you've read the book, if you've heard any of my videos talking about my relationship with my partner and the difficulties that we went through, but we both came out the other side by looking after each other and finding the courage to have those discussions. But that wasn't driven by a fear of being alone. That was driven by a growing sense of self-awareness, of understanding that I was repeating patterns, and the only way to break a pattern is to behave differently. So rather than running away, as maybe I would have done in the past, and hoping that I could start fresh, it was facing a problem straight on. But so many of our choices, I really believe, are made because we are driven to want to be heard, to want to be seen, and not to strike out on our own. And of course, there are exceptions, and there are plenty of people who don't want to associate with large groups and go off on long walkabout expeditions on their own, trying to find themselves. Equally, that's another issue of why does somebody need to remove themselves completely from human connection and human contact, which is such a usual, conventional driving force. You know, we are communal creatures who need each other. We need those connections. So why is somebody needing to remove themselves entirely from those situations? I also started thinking about loss then, fear of losing people. Now, I don't have children, so there's a whole layer there of a parental fear of losing a child that I can't even begin to comprehend or comment on. But have I felt responsible for people? Have my maternal instincts and nurturing instincts come out in all my other relationships? Absolutely. I understand it's quite a different dynamic. But equally, I can't ever remember a time where I've been afraid to lose someone. Now, you could say, I could say, that's incredibly self-aware in a spiritual, that's very advanced in a spiritual way, knowing that somebody's energy always stays with me, that I'm always connected to the family members and the friends that I've lost, and I have lost family members and friends and over the years. But have I ever feared somebody dying? No. Is it because I haven't fully opened myself up and given myself to somebody so completely with such unconditional love that I can't bear the thought of being without them? Is it self-protection, or is it a holistic understanding of energy and spirits and the circle of life? You are going to have your own feelings about that. And this is such an important subject under the umbrella of fear, the fear of being alone. If you think about losing, let's not talk about children because that's quite a different subject. But if you think about losing a parent or a partner, somebody of your own age or older, how does that make you feel? Are you filled with terror? And what is that fear about? Is it a fear of not being able to cope from a security perspective? Is it a fear of not being able to take care of yourself when you get older? Is it that you enjoy that person's company so much and you can never imagine anybody else filling in any of those gaps? What are all of the different layers of fear there? Because I have an extremely good relationship with my partner. He is my foundation stone. He's my rock. We complement each other brilliantly. I'm fortunate enough to have a wonderful network of really close girlfriends, and each of them brings something very special to my life. But does it make me afraid to lose them? No, I think I learned from a really young age. I didn't even learn it. That's not something I've taught myself unless it's been out of self-protection, because I've given so much of myself away looking after people as a child and into adulthood. Have I shut myself down? Have I locked my heart away so I don't get hurt? So I don't fear losing anybody, so I can do my job better, more effectively, so I can step outside of myself and my own challenges and be able to teach others and guide more effectively because I've detached myself a bit from my emotions. I can always remember my mum saying to me that I should never be a mother because I was too selfish, which is spectacularly ironic because, of course, I'd spent so much time looking after her emotionally, and I give myself fully to my friends and my relationships way to my detriment. I've learnt to shift the balance back. But did she have a point? She was noticing when I moved to New Zealand how quickly I was able to adapt to leaving my friends and family. And she continued to grieve right up until her death, the fact that I'd moved away, even though we had incredibly close contact. We were very close, and she was a very positive, supporting pillar within my life, as well as the challenges that she brought with her. But was she being pinpoint accurate with what she perceived, because she was so afraid of losing people with all of the emotional layering and the baggage that she was carrying? She couldn't understand why I could be all right and quite self-sufficient emotionally and practically. And for her, the only explanation was that I was cold and closed off. These are not issues that I shy away from. I find this really interesting. So how do you sit with this massive umbrella of needing to find where you belong and the fear of not finding where you belong? We're compelled to look. If you're still watching this, then you're obviously enjoying the connection and what it's reflecting back to you, which is wonderful. But we are always looking for that. I'm hoping that there will be somebody still interested at this point, because that makes me feel less alone. It makes all of my experience and sharing that really, really worthwhile. And do you have a whole energetic network or a faith-based or a spirit-based support network that helps you to always feel like you're connected, to never feel alone? And what is it that drives you towards other people? Massive subjects. So Adam was right when we had this conversation the other day for his podcast, that we need to talk about this more. And I've been thinking about it ever since we finished recording. There's so much in this, and not at all in a negative way, but always, it's a case of thinking about your decisions and your choices, and if they are having a detrimental, a negative effect on you, that's when you need to look at them. Are your decisions from a fear of being alone? Are they driving you into an existence which is causing you more harm? And then really looking at the source behind that. Loads of food for thought. Thank you so much for being there with me and for connecting with this massive subject. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.